come here to chew bubble gum and kick ass. And I'm all out of bubble.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages. Kind of sounds like I've got the sound up a little too much. Let's look at the view over here. All right, I think I'm doing okay. Hey, guess what? Guess what? Welcome to the Bloviating Zeppelin's Berserk Bobcat Saloon radio show, live and direct right here on the SHR Media Network. Today is Tuesday. It's March 27th, the year of our Lord 2018, and already the computer is telling me, high CPU usage detected. You may experience performance risk. You know, if you face Jesus. If you face performance risk, ladies and gentlemen, perhaps like this computer, it's time to wear an electronic condom. Right? You got a belly up to the bar. We've kept your seat, and it's great to see you back. Snowball is going to be your bartender. Tonight he pours with the best of them, and the lava lamp is indeed lighted to my left, your right, indicating that, as per normal, once again, if you want to listen on shrmedia.com. That's where the chat room is. That's the only one I monitor. That's the only one I have time for. Chat room at shrmedia.com. If you want to watch the show, go to the SHR Media Facebook page or the SHR Media YouTube channel, because we don't water our drinks just like we don't water our conversation. Politics, religion, crime, culture, economics, race, sex, science, law, we talk about it all here at the Saloon. Nothing is sacred, the speech is free, but the booze is not. All we ask is that you tip your waiter or waitress and jiggle the damn handle on the toilet. It's California. Speaking of California, hey, that's where I'm broadcasting, behind enemy lines in occupied California. Unfortunately, I have some bad news tonight, and then let me go to the guest immediately. Number one, how sad of me, how rude of me. Let me back up even further than that. Number one, thank you for the folks being in chat right now. Thanks to Mike, thanks to Mary Brockman, thanks to Right Wing Aviator. Woo, baby. Rock on, sir. And thanks to two unmasked viewers who will remain unmasked, because that's what we do here in the Saloon. We don't unmask anyone, unlike the federal government. Tonight we got a great show for you, and we've got some great happy stories. Tonight I've got on attorney Lawrence Kogan, and I spoke to him last year, and we'll go into this in depth after he calls. He should be calling at about 15 minutes after. And Lawrence Kogan is an attorney. He represents a number of interests. He practices law. I think he's licensed for New York, D.C., and one other venue that escapes me offhand right now, because I don't have his CV is right here, but I'm not going to read that until later. And he spoke at great depth last year, 2017, and I spoke to him at Freedom Fest in Las Vegas, and he had a lot of great things to say at that time. And it primarily revolves around what people traditionally known as the deep state. But the funny thing about Mr. Kogan is that at the time, the phrase deep state was not bandied about nearly as much as it is today. Well, he gave me essentially example after example after example. See what I did there? With the glasses, that's why you need to watch on the SHR Media Facebook page, and why you need to watch on the SHR Media YouTube channel. This is a visual right now. Just like that commercial, okay? Because this shows you how serious I am when I do this. Okay. I'm moving right along. In any event, I got to get rocking and rolling. Anyway, Mr. Kogan is going to come on. He's going to tell you about some of the encounters that he's had regarding the deep state. And essentially how you're losing your property rights, you're losing other rights and freedoms from people who are unelected drones. Yeah, wait until you hear some of the things that he has to say. Unfortunately, I have to start it out in this fashion. You've been wondering why Jersey Joe hasn't been on the air. He usually broadcasts on the SHR Media Network Monday through Friday. Today he came out with this official statement on Facebook. He said, I wanted to let you all know I'm suspending the Reaver of Common Sense show indefinitely. I will return to SHR Media, but due to an issue in life, I had to make this decision. I want to thank Sackhead Sean, Sackheads Clint, Sackheads BZ, and all the fans. There are too many to thank, and everyone knows who they are, and that I appreciate them. So very sad words from Jersey Joe. We want to see him come back as soon as possible, but everyone realizes that in life, you got to do what you got to do, which is best for you, best for your family, etc. So condolences to Jersey Joe. Whatever you're facing, we hope you surmount it and you come back soon because you got a great show. And that dude put two hours of content together every night. That's a lot of work for somebody that does not make a big darn wage. Unlike my shameless contract here at the SHR Media Network. Now, we do, however, have, let's see what I got. I got about 5 more minutes. I don't know if I'll be able to fit all of these in here. But after a bit of bad news, I think perhaps it's time for...
It's time for happy stories and good times.
This is from Sky News. France terror attack. Hero policeman married hours before he died. He sacrificed his life for the citizens of France. That was bad. However, there was some good in it after all. And you want to talk about a hero? You want to talk about a French hero? We're talking about this guy, Lieutenant Colonel Arnaud Beltrame, who's been praised by President Macron, was planning to marry his partner in June. A police officer who took the place of a hostage during a terror attack at a French supermarket married his partner while on his deathbed. Lieutenant Colonel Arnaud Beltrame voluntarily swapped himself for a female store worker during a hostage siege about 2 weeks ago. The 44-year-old officer died in the hospital from his injuries after being shot 3 times by radical Islamists, and I'm not even going to mention that piece of shit's name, in southwest France. A mass was held paying tribute to the victims of the attack. Again, I say, you want a French hero? There's a French hero. And then, of course, there's this story. We're going to migrate on. This one I like. Food truck employee shoots at alleged robber in Algiers, police say. The victim told police the armed robber jumped into the hood of his food truck before the victim shot at him 1 time. And by the way, too bad I can't put this on the screen, because right in smack dab in the middle of the ass of this article is a photo of a bullet hole in a windshield indicating, hey, it looks like this guy did. This is from New Orleans. A bullet hole remained in the front windshield of the Thai Di Jing food truck in Algiers. The Thai food truck, which was parked in the 200 block of Morgan Street Wednesday night, was about to be robbed for a second time in just over a week by the same man, according to the owner. That's kind of bad. According to an initial police report after closing down for the night, the 37-year-old recognized someone who robbed him the week prior, approaching the truck. The victim locked the doors, but the alleged robber tried to open them before jumping on the hood of the truck and pulling out a gun. I saw him point a gun at me, the man said, so I shot out 1 time. The robber was not hit. None of the 3 people inside the food truck were hurt either. However, the pair of incidents has the Food Truck Coalition president, Erica Lasser, quite worried. It's a scary situation because we're all doing jobs at night. I have a gun, but I don't carry it. Now it makes me want to carry it, but who wants to use it? So, happy stories in terms of, yeah, it takes a gun to fend off someone with a gun. A radical concept, that leftists just don't seem to grok. Here's another story, and I really like this one, because we're going to be talking, as I indicated, about the deep state tonight. Well, let this one rock your world just a little bit. This is from the Washington Examiner. John Bolton reportedly set to fire. He's not going to set fire to them. What is going on with my brainulus tonight? John Bolton reportedly set to fire dozens of White House officials amidst leaking problem. That's a happy story. Incoming National Security Advisor John Bolton is reportedly poised to remove dozens of White House officials when he starts his new job early next month. Stop. By the way, for those of you who are thinking that, oh my God, the Democrats, leftists, and the American media maggots are going to get in the way of his appointment, well, guess what? It's an appointment that President Trump gets to make, and it doesn't go through Congress. Just thought I'd tell you. Among those who will get the boot will be Obama administration holdovers and anyone who isn't loyal to President Trump, sources told Foreign Policy. Bolton can and will clean house, one former White House official was quoted as saying. And this is Bolton, of course, replacing H.R. McMaster as far as I'm concerned. That's a happy story. Looks like I got about another minute or so before Mr. Kogan calls in. Here's another happy story. Now, if I can remember to tell you why this was an omnibus bill instead of a budget, remember? The omnibus bill was signed. Now, I should just like to proffer that there is a difference between an omnibus bill and a budget that is signed by Congress. Keep that in mind, because if I fail to mention it tonight when I get into Lawrence Kogan's story, I'll try to remember it tomorrow on Sackheads or Thursday night on my show, because the difference between the two is stunning, and it appears that President Trump is going to take very serious advantage of that shortly. With that omnibus bill, however, there is one thing that did happen that was a great positive note. Donald Trump signed the Taylor Force Act, and what did that do? That happened to defund Palestinian terror. Well, stop! Why were we doing that in the first place? Because we know the Palestinians pay terrorists, the remaining family, the surviving family members, they pay them when their loved ones blow their lungs out. And now President Trump has decided, yes, we're defunding the Palestinians. President Donald Trump signed the Taylor Force Act on last Friday, which was attached to the omnibus spending bill and passed into law along with the rest of the legislation. Trump has been excoriated by conservatives for signing the omnibus, a bloated package that gave Democrats almost everything they wanted except amnesty for illegal aliens. But the passage of the Taylor Force Act is a silver lining and a milestone in foreign policy that could save taxpayers money. Yes, finally. Again, more statements being made. Now, maybe you're thinking to yourself, bill, budget, bill, budget. I wonder if it is that perhaps Donald Trump is working the system. Ponder that just for a moment or two or a day until I can get to it next, because there's a method to my madness, and apparently there's a method to his madness as well. And then the final happy story that I have tonight. The Trump administration decided that they were going to put one heinous, horrible, excoriable question into the new census, into the 2020 census, because, let's see, if I'm not mistaken, I think a census comes out every 10 years. Okay, all right, here we go. We've got Mr. Kogan calling in. So what we're going to do is this. We're going to transition from happy stories and good times, because there were some great positive things that occurred recently. And tonight, now, since he's here, I want to welcome back to the Saloon somebody whom most of you, unfortunately, have never heard. I played his interview last year before many of you entered the saloon, and his message was so important that I asked him back. And that man is Lawrence Kogan, Esquire, whom I interviewed at the 2017 Las Vegas Freedom Fest for the SHR Media Network. Mr. Kogan, who is an attorney, he has a CV. I'm holding it up right here for those who are on the Facebook Live or the YouTube channel. This is a massive CV. Part of it is that Mr. Kogan is an international business, trade, and regulatory attorney licensed to practice law in the states of New York and New Jersey and the District of Columbia. Mr. Kogan has counseled public as well as private, closely held international businesses operating within the commercial and financial sectors for more than 17 years. This is important, specializing in the areas of business, commercial, corporate, customs, tax, and trade law. That's going to come into play very shortly. During the past several years, he engaged in international trade work on behalf of a coalition of prominent U.S. trade associations, which involved extensive research and analysis of foreign and domestic environmental, health, and food safety regulations and related product and process standards that were being utilized by foreign governments as disguised technical barriers to international trade. He's also advised the Bush administration, a number of officials there, congressional subcommittee chairs, and foreign trade officials about WTO, EU, and U.S. regulatory technical standards. The CV continues, but what I wanted to indicate is that Mr. Kogan essentially was talking last year about the Europeization of the United States. That's what I got out of what it is that he was talking about. He engaged in federal law and policy practice to first identify, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, that it will be discovered that he was, in fact, the first to discover the Europeanization of the United States of America, which on its face may sound acceptable, but after we talk to Mr. Kogan in depth, I think you're going to find out that that's not acceptable at all. Now, Mr. Kogan defends property rights and property owners against Euro-style regulations that were enacted in the United States and have been so after about the past 15 years or so, and at a what somebody would term a really accelerated rate over the past 8 years. And you can find his work at this website. It's itsd.org, which is the Institute for Trade Standards and Sustainable Development. So, Mr. Kogan, welcome to you tonight. I thank you for speaking to me on the SHR Media Network last year. And also, I want to thank you tonight for one very important and salient reason, because people that I talk to that are on the East Coast, and obviously you're on the East Coast, folks, they have to stay up really late at night to talk to me live. So without a doubt, without any more intro, because my God, I could go on. Welcome, Lawrence Kogan, sir, to the Berserk Bobcat Saloon.
Mark, thank you for having me back again, and I appreciate all of the accolades.
Well, the deal is, they're all true. There's much more that I missed and I can go back into, but if there's someone who has an incredible pedigree, that would be you, sir.
I'm just a hardworking guy that discovered things 15 years ago in doing an assignment for a client. And what I discovered was very disturbing. It kept me up at night.
Okay.
And I had to put what I observed into paper in writing and share it with people. And it got people's attention. What was very disconcerting to me, which was very concerning to me, was that I kept on finding more and more and more. Now, 15 years later, and after 31 years of being, a practicing attorney, I start to see things even more clearly. You work with different clients; they have all different types of problems, and then you get the opportunity to engage in policy work at the federal level in Washington. And you start, if you're paying attention at all, you start putting things together.
Okay.
And in today's world in Washington, it's a swamp. It's a disgusting swamp where all the avarice and greed and lack of protocol and discourteousness are now apparent for everyone to see, and that's always been there apparently. We just didn't see it, we Americans. We weren't paying attention.
Would you say that now at this point that the three branches of government, which we know to be the legislative, the executive, and the judicial, would you go so far as to maybe submit that there's a fourth branch of government to include the deep state, now that you've discovered the things that you have?
There is a deep state out there. There are, just to give you an example, when President Obama left office, or before he left office, he had all these political appointees, and many of them went into the civil service to continue the good work of that administration. When I say good, I mean quote unquote good. Okay, not good to them, but bad for everybody else.
Okay.
Apparently, this happened after every administration. A lot of the politicals go into the bureaucracy, and that's how the policies of the prior administration are preserved. We have a case now where the Obama administration members who wanted to maintain the legacy of that president are embedded in the federal bureaucracy throughout all the agencies. You also have a party in the Senate that doesn't want to confirm the nominees of the president because they don't like the president that's now in office.
Correct.
That creates a logjam. The number of people in appointed positions are fewer than they should be. Decisions that the White House would want to have made aren't being made because of a lack of people to implement them. Yes, federal employees need to follow their boss's directives. But in the federal government, how many people really get fired?
Very
for not
few.
doing that?
Yes, very few.
So what we have today is a runaway administrative state that is facilitated by the deep state legacy bureaucracy that's embedded, that then gets rubber stamped by courts under this notion of judicial deference to agency expertise. So what you have, and then you have a Congress that doesn't do its job even when it's there. We know it doesn't do its job when it's out on recess. So you have Article I powers of Congress being not exercised. You have judicial powers being deferred to the executive. So you have an executive branch now that is oversized compared to the judiciary and the legislature. Is that a balance of powers that the framers intended?
Not at all.
Not.
Not at all. If I remember correctly, and I'm trying to put on my thinking cap here, you said originally back in 2017 when I first spoke to you that you thought that our, meaning the United States, Achilles' heel was our very own rule of law.
True. It is. We have a system where everybody buys into the notion of the rule of law being enforced in an equitable, objective manner. And unfortunately, that is changing. And people may somewhat feel outraged, but they don't appear to be outraged enough. Everyone seems to be worried about their own bank account and their own affairs, and then we just let the swamp grow. And it continues to grow, and it won't stop until it's pushed back or eradicated.
We've got about 4 more minutes to the bottom of the hour. Folks, we're talking to Lawrence Kogan, who's an attorney, and we're going to start focusing when we come back from the break. If I'm not mistaken, Mr. Kogan, you focus on U.S. citizens who happen to be owning property in, northwest Montana, southern Oregon, northern California, western Pennsylvania, and I think the western state of Washington, if I'm not mistaken.
And eastern Pennsylvania and Michigan.
Okay, all right, 2 additional ones. It's almost as if, folks, if your state wasn't mentioned, it may very well be in the not too terribly distant future. If you had to summarize something about the primary thing we're going to be talking about tonight is, would you say, Mr. Kogan, that our private property rights are being impaired by government itself. Would that be basically it in a nutshell?
That would be it in a nutshell. Whenever you see a regulation, it's going to affect the way you exercise your private property rights.
Okay, so you made a discovery, and what was that discovery that opened your eyes and said, oh, this is a topic that I have got to get into?
Well, it was because you could trace it everywhere. These regulations that we looked at 15 years ago came from the European Union. But when you dig deep enough, you go back to the 1970s United States, and you had all the liberal hippie culture wanting to promote the same environmental evangelism. Back then in the 70s, the environmental regulation severely curtailed private property rights. It was like another level of taxation. We stopped doing that during the Reagan era. We tried to slow it down. The Bush 41 brought it back. Clinton then elaborated, and Bush 43 didn't do anything really to knock it back down again. Now we have Obama in 2009, and he put it on steroids. And the Republicans sit there with their twiddling their thumbs, because I really think that they're now part of it. They like the control that regulations bring them.
There are many times.
And they like people.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, sir.
And they like when people come and make campaign donations in order to eliminate the rules that they themselves tacitly approved.
Is that not kind of unlike stripping I mean the generic us, the American taxpayer, the American citizens, basically stripping us of our rights and then wanting to sell them back to us?
Essentially, they know that property rights give people the right of speech.
Bingo.
Okay, if you've got land, you can speak up to defend not only your own property, but the property of others. What they're trying to do is basically convert us from landowners into tenants. And when we're tenants, we have less free speech. We have fewer voting rights. We do as the landlord says. So really, this is a long way back toward feudalism, serfdom.
Think about that just for a moment. That's what I've said for quite some time, and Mr. Kogan has just put his finger directly on it. Now, when we come back, I'm going to ask Mr. Kogan to go into some specific cases that he investigated originally involving various forms of rights, and then he's also working on some current cases. So, folks, we're going to take a break, be about 3 or 4 minutes, and we'll be right back. We're talking to Lawrence Kogan, an attorney who made a rather amazing discovery about the deep state and how essentially your rights are terribly affected and impacted. Folks, you're listening to the Bloviating Zeppelin right here live and direct on the Berserk Bobcat Saloon. Don't go anywhere.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Featuring right thinking from a left brain and doing the job the American maggots won't. BZ is fundamentally changing America one diaper at a time. Just when safety pin manufacturers are running out of metal for the diapers of the leftists, where the speech is free, but the drinks are not. The Bloviating Zeppelin's Berserk Bobcat Saloon can be heard every Tuesday and Thursday night, commencing at 11 p.m. Eastern and 8 p.m. Pacific, where pushback is a requisite art form in and of itself. Let your ossicles be truly liberated when you listen to the Bloviating Zeppelin's Berserk Bobcat Saloon, only on SHR Media Network. No ferrets were harmed in the making of this ad.
When dirty politicians, shadow governments, and deceptive Islam blind the world with fake stream media smoke, their only fear is one man with a cane. I'm Dave Milner. Join me through shrmedia.com, highplains.talkradio.com, and the Western Free Radio Network at Spreaker, YouTube, and iTunes for a different perspective weekly on the Unpleasant Blind Guy. And catch me on Jeff Mitchell's EDL Radio on blogtalkradio.com. There's
no surrender ever,
because truth is not always pleasant.
This is Sam on SHR Media. You can listen to my new show starting on Tuesdays in January. Get my perspective on national politics, a conservative's perspective on California politics, the latest in the war on terror, all of that and a lot more here on Tuesdays at SHR Media. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Sam_SHR Media.
Human by race, Christian by faith, American by nationality, and conservative by choice. Reverend Ralph J. Chittum Sr. is the right guy on SHR Media from 8:05 to 9 p.m. Monday through Friday. And if on the rare occasion I am ever wrong, I will still always be right. The right guy on SHR Media.
Beware, the Jersey Takeover is here. Every Monday through Friday, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, you can catch River Common Sense Show hosted by Jersey Joe, right here on shrmedia.com. Only Jersey can deliver hell like no one else. So consider this your fair warning.
In a world controlled by corrupt politicians, a team of ordinary men emerge from the ashes to give voice to the voiceless, hope to the hopeless, clues to the clueless. Sackheads Sean, Sackheads Clint, and Sackheads BZ. The Sackheads Radio Show every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Pacific and 11 p.m. Eastern on shrmedia.com. Watch on YouTube, Facebook, and the High Plains Pundit Network. The best in late-night conservative talk, the Sackheads Radio Show, only on the SHR Media Network.
Go ahead, I'll say it.
Some of the best A-roll is going to be B-roll.
Like, what are you talking about?
Just like the last question that you cut a couple seconds.
Yeah, I'm a freaking artist. I can't just come up with this shit off the top of my head. Are you freaking kidding me right now?
Good point. Exactly right.
Hey, this is Sackhead Clint, and I'm with Sackhead Sean, Sackhead BZ. No communists allowed on the SHR Media Network.
Damn straight, mister.
Back to the show.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome back to the Bloviating Zeppelin's Berserk, Bobcat, Saloon radio show, live and direct from the SHR Media Network. 2 miles from the locus of evil on the West Coast, the Bill Mill in Sacramento, California, where essentially everything evil stems, at least in this state, and certainly a good portion of the left coast. We've been speaking to and are going to continue to speak for the rest of the show to attorney Lawrence Kogan, who is telling us about property rights, the lack of rights, and how many of your rights and freedoms are being impinged by the federal government by way of the deep state. So, Mr. Kogan, welcome back. If there was one thing that kind of illuminated your brain or a particular case, what was that, sir?
I can't really put my finger on one instance, but, you know, when you do a lot of research over a long period of time, you start connecting the dots. And you do the research, and then all of a sudden you hit the street, and you have to deal with people's real-life situations. And then you start to realize, okay, all that stuff you did before now has manifested itself on the ground. See, when you work in Washington, you're dealing with clouds and sky cities, because you're talking about a lot of theory, you're talking a lot of policy, which is prospective in outlook. When you're actually practicing in the field, you're talking about the here and the now. You've descended the clouds, you've hit the ground, and hopefully you hit the ground running. All of these regulations, whether they come from Europe or third countries, but really Europe, or they come from here in Washington and from your state legislatures and executive agencies, they all ultimately affect your ability to exercise your private property rights, which are supposedly guaranteed to you in the Constitution. And that's when you start to see the connections here. If a regulation on clean air or clean water affects your ability to conduct your business, unless you get a permit, and those permits are expensive, then you start to realize, well, I'm not able anymore to do what I want. There is some other force compelling me to back off what I'm doing because it's affecting other people. And that's what these regulations essentially do. They say that your private rights have a limitation, and they can't affect the public rights.
Okay, let me back up here just a little bit so that people have a better perspective of what happened. You and I met at the Freedom Fest in Las Vegas last year, and the Freedom Fest is a consortium of people who are libertarians and free thinkers and conservatives, and they get together and they discuss any number of the issues of the day. So let me back up a little bit and perhaps put some perspective on this. Are you a libertarian, sir?
Yeah, I'm a libertarian, but I'm also aware and I fully recognize that my rights, my natural rights, my God-given natural rights that are recognized in the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution, and the Bill have a limit, and it's like a coin. A coin has two sides. You have rights and you have responsibilities as a libertarian, don't you?
Yes.
You have rights that you can exercise that are natural, but you yet have responsibility to exercise those rights so they don't tread on other people.
Absolutely.
So you have
correct.
to exercise your rights responsibly. When people only look at one side of that equation or one side of that coin and they forget about the other side, guess what? They give the government the pretense, the reason, the justification to intervene, interrupt, and involve themselves in your personal affairs. That's what's happening here. Okay? When I spoke to libertarians in Washington, and I say this, they don't necessarily disagree, but it's not something they like to broadcast. Because in Washington, they speak and live in a bubble. They like to speak academically. But when the rubber hits the road, you can realize, and you see it around society today, people don't exercise their rights responsibly as they should, and guess what? Government has more reason to get involved.
I have to tell you that you schooled me when you spoke to me last year, and I went through that discussion that we had, and you happened to teach me quite a bit. And a few of the things that you taught me is that our private property rights are impaired by the federal government itself through, like you say, the imposition of innumerable regulations. And then there was the issue that you mentioned of Native American tribes recognized by the federal government as having, sit down folks, as having superior rights, or what's known as, what you told me, Aboriginal water rights, for example. And it was the American Civil Rights Act of 1968 that essentially said Native Americans, however, don't have the same rights as others, that the 14th Amendment doesn't protect Native Americans. And then there was a 2012 law enacted by Congress that allows federally recognized tribes living on 365 reservations, it may be more now, to enter into leasing agreements with foreign powers in order to pursue, like, agricultural, economic interests that they might have, cultural interests, and maybe religious interests, without the Department of Interior oversight. And would that be accurate, too? When you told me that last year, I was stunned on any number of levels. Again, information people don't know.
You know, it's really Alice in Wonderland-like, the way the federal government, since I would say the mid-19th century, has been working either for or against Native Americans. It's almost whimsical. As Justice Clarence Thomas has said in his decisions, it's kind of schizophrenic. And I think, Mark, what you're referring to is that the recent Supreme Court brief that I had given you a copy of.
Okay, and
which we just filed actually earlier this month in a very important case involving the state of Washington versus Ryan Zinke, the Interior Secretary.
Okay.
And it involves the tribes or the federal government saying that years ago Washington State had installed culverts, piping to transverse roads, and that piping was supposedly built to specs provided by the federal government. And unfortunately, the tribes are saying now that their Aboriginal fishing rights are impaired to the extent that salmon can't make their way through the culverts, and that as a result of the federal government's fiduciary tribal trust obligation to allow them to exercise their Aboriginal rights, such as fishing, Washington State needs to replace thousands and thousands of culverts and billions of dollars of expense to Washington State taxpayers. So what we did was, and I was working with a group, CERA, C-E-R-A, Civil Rights Equal Alliance, Civil Equal Rights Alliance, and it's a nonprofit. And what we did was we prepared an amicus curiae brief, which is a friend of the court brief that would support the state of Washington to apprise them of the history that goes back into the 1800s of this war power that the federal government asserts behind closed doors and behind a black curtain whenever it wants to move the natural resource chessboard around. And that's a lot to say in one sentence. And it's also a lot to conceive of in your mind. But it shows that the government has been deceiving the American public for a lot longer than we all think.
And what is, in your estimation, what is the deception on the part of the government regarding specifically that case?
Well, the fact is that people who were around to see the Watergate era know that there's a war power statute that Congress enacted after Nixon abused his right as the chief executive officer to put soldiers in a war theater without Congress declaring war. Okay, the Constitution says only Congress has the right to declare war. The President has the right to conduct foreign affairs and to defend the United States if attacked, but does he have the power to declare war? Not per the Constitution. That is true if he can declare war if Congress signs off. During the Civil War, we had a major war, and we had it between ourselves. And there were statutes that allowed the President to basically set aside civil rights during the course of a war, and that is largely allowed due to the laws of war, which are international. Well, after the Civil War ended, they still kept the war power statute alive. And it was with respect to Native Americans. Because, as you know, there was this concept of Indian country when the U.S. was a series of territories. And that allowed the United States government to conduct warfare against the Native American tribes. Well, that statute is still on the books today. We found it, the Act of 1871, which was recodified into 25 U.S.C. 70 and 25 U.S.C. 71.
Okay, and what are those? What do those statutes say?
Basically, they say that They said that the treaty making with Indians, the practice of making treaties with Indians, so far as to say domesticate them and to create peace and put them on reservations. And there are a number of Indian treaties out there now. That treaty practice ended in 1871, and then Congress started passing laws setting forth the federal government's policy as to how they deal with Native Americans. The thing is that the statute actually says in its annotations, which are the words that describe what the statute means, that tribes will still be considered, Indians will still be considered as belligerents. What that in effect means is that they create the fiction that the federal government's still at war with the Indians, so that there is a war power that could be exercised through that statute and with several other statutes that provide the Secretary of the Interior, who at that time was, and the Interior Department was part of the Department of War, with the ability to invoke the power of warfare to get things done out in the territories, in Indian country. There is a statute on Indian country that's still on the books. It actually was removed from the books and then put on after World War II. It resumed its place in a recodified fashion. So, if you put the statutes together, we have a fictional the government can exercise the fiction that there is a fictional state of war with Native Americans within Indian country, which is pretty much the western part of the United States, and use that war power to reallocate natural resources between different groups. So in Montana, they had a dam transfer, a Category 3 hazard dam, major Kerr Dam, along the Flathead River.
Okay.
A major water source, one of the two major headwaters of the northwestern United States. That dam got moved over to a Native American tribe. The dam is actually owned by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and any of the irrigators that want water on the Flathead Indian Reservation had their water rights cut 2/3. Okay? The pretense is that there's a fake war with the Native Americans in order to make this change. Really what's going on is you have a Columbia River Treaty where the U.S. government is selling power to the Canadians and making a heck of a lot of money using the water through hydropower to generate the electric. One example. Another example, Klamath Basin, Southern Oregon, Northern California. They've got 4 dams on the Klamath River that the tribes are arguing block the salmon from coming upstream and therefore denying them their right to exercise their Aboriginal water rights. The federal government was basically also using the Endangered Species Act to say, well, the water levels coming from Klamath Lake, Upper Klamath Lake, need to be diverted downriver rather than to the Klamath Irrigation Project, which is a national federal irrigation project that was created back in the early 20th century to irrigate lands that were otherwise high desert. The Klamath dams were going to come down, even though they were privately held, not federally held, and even though there was already an interstate Oregon-California compact to cover the allocation of water. And what ended up happening was that the federal government worked feverishly during the Bush administration and the Obama administration to create these new agreements to sidestep the interstate compact that would have required congressional approval to change. And they then created these agreements to reallocate the water rights from the irrigators to the Indians. And they used, as false pretense, they used the Endangered Species Act, saying that there's all this disease when the river levels are too low. And they also argue tribal trust. The federal government has a fiduciary trust obligation dating back to the 1830s based on international law to watch out for the Native Americans who are dependent sovereigns. So they were trying to reallocate all the natural resources. Now, in the Montana case, I was hired to try to interrupt the dam transfer. In the Oregon-California case, I was hired to try to disrupt the agreements. In Montana, I wasn't able to disrupt the dam transfer yet, though I'm still working on it. In Oregon and California, I was able to help disrupt the agreements. But the fact is that the federal government was using pretense, but really using its ability to exercise those war power statutes without telling people they were exercising them. How else could you move natural resources around and from one party to the other without paying them just compensation?
Well, essentially what you're saying is that it's about money and power, power and money, and control. I'm sorry, I forgot control. Once again.
Right. Some people think there's minerals under those grounds. Some people think that there's water that they want to sell and move around. Okay? Ultimately, they can move water from Klamath Basin, throw it into Sacramento Basin, pass it down past Central Valley, and then bring it down to L.A. because you know that Colorado River compact?
Yes.
Well, that doesn't provide enough water to California.
Well, yes, that's why we have a massive concrete canal in Sacramento that moves all of the Sierra Nevada water up where I live at the 4,000-foot level down to Southern California as well.
Right, and so look at the San Francisco Bay Delta Bay Agreement. There is a big agreement out of San Francisco Bay that moves all the water around, based on this notion of watersheds. That's what's happening when they're moving the water past Sacramento, from Northern California, Southern Oregon, all the way down south. But they couldn't do this any other way. They would have to invoke some power that overarches everything else. Okay? In Washington State, they've got all types of reallocations of fishing rights from private pipeline owners to Native American tribes. And they based it on off-reservation fishing rights, which are aboriginal in nature, and because of the specialized treaties that the government representative at the time, Stevens, had entered into with the tribes, these treaties have been used by very creative and liberal courts to infer aboriginal rights that the tribes never gave up at the time that the reservations on which they now reside were created. So you've got private tie landowners paying taxes to the state who have to yield to Native American tribes based on aboriginal rights that predate the formation of the United States of America. That's what aboriginal means.
Right.
So these rights supersede those of American private property owners. Tribes are deemed sovereign or semi-sovereign and don't have to follow the Constitution. The tribal governments don't have to follow the Constitution. You mentioned in the beginning of the show the Civil Rights Act from '68. It's the Indian Civil Rights Act from '68. They had their own Civil Rights Act that Congress passed and the President signed into law. It sanctions tribal governments to deny Native Americans full constitutional rights. It actually allows them to deny them full constitutional rights. So you have a Native American who's an American citizen who has fewer constitutional rights than an illegal immigrant that crosses the border and then seeks sanctuary. Where is the logic or justice there?
If you ask me, does it not sound, Lawrence Kogan, folks, we're talking to Lawrence Kogan, an attorney who works on property rights, does it not sound, I should say it sounds to me like the federal government wants what it wants when it wants it, and it will use, it's given fewer rights to Native Americans, yet at the same time, as you indicate, using the War Power Act, it will use the Native Americans to get what it wants as well. It wants both things at once, or am I way out of line with that?
No, you're exactly correct. They recognize the Aboriginal off-reservation water rights of the tribes, but that is not a consumptive water right. They're not drinking that water up. They're not diverting the water from the stream. They're using it for fish. So who gets to use the water? Who owns the water right? It's really the federal government. It's a federal reserve right. The reservations on which the tribes reside, all that land is owned by the federal government. The tribes are mere tenants on the land. Any asset that a tribe has placed into federal trust is owned by the federal government. It's on their balance sheet, not the tribe's balance sheet. Only if the tribes pay taxes to the state or locality do they own the land.
Power and money, power and control, control and power. That's what it's all about. We got about one more minute to go before the top of the hour. And again, we're talking to Lawrence Kogan. I'm sorry, sir. Go ahead.
When you really look at it, and we relate it back to my experience with the European laws, let's make the grand proposition that a green federal government will use the control to promote global governance through the United Nations and the policy of sustainable development, which is locally realized as Agenda 21.
Ah, interesting. Okay, now you're bringing in Agenda 21. Okay, let's stop right there. And then again, that's also why you're throwing in the Europeanization of the United States, ceding power, or the government systems taking power away from the private citizen. Folks, we're going to take a break. We're talking to Lawrence Kogan. We're going to come right back. Now, Mr. Kogan brought up Agenda 21. I would wager that there are quite a number of folks in here who are not aware of what Agenda 21 is. And when we come back, I'd like to ask Mr. Kogan what that might be and how he thinks perhaps that might influence a lot of what's occurring today in the United States. Folks, you're listening to the Bloviating Zeppelin right here live and direct on the SHR Media Network, broadcasting live and direct behind enemy lines in occupied California. We're going to go to a break. Come right back.
You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Good evening. Broadcasting behind enemy lines in occupied California, the Bloviating Zeppelin's Berserk Bobcat Saloon radio show is featured on the SHR Media Network every Tuesday and Thursday night for 2 hours at 11 p.m. Eastern and 8 p.m. Pacific. Whilst manufacturers are running out of metal for the diapers of the leftists, BZ continues to radically change the world of leftists, one diaper at a time. Stop balancing your checkbooks. Stop cleaning your fish tanks. The Bloviating Zeppelin's Berserk Bobcat Saloon radio show is your magnet for truth, justice, obesity, a darkened studio, and late-night freedom. No United States of America freedoms were abridged in the making of this ad.
Human by race, Christian by faith, American by nationality, and conservative by choice. Reverend Ralph J. Chittum Sr. is the right guy on SHR Media from 8:05 to 9 p.m., Monday through Friday. And if on the rare occasion I am ever wrong, I will still always be right. The right guy on SHR Media.
In a world controlled by corrupt politicians, a team of ordinary men emerge from the ashes to give voice to the voiceless, hope to the hopeless, clues to the clueless. Sackheads Sean, Sackheads Clint, and Sackheads BZ. The Sackheads Radio Show every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Pacific and 11 p.m. Eastern on shrmedia.com. Watch on YouTube, Facebook, and the High Plains Pundit Network. The best in late-night conservative talk, the Sackheads Radio Show, only on the SHR Media Network.
Good, I'll say it again.
Some of the best A-roll is going to be B-roll.
Like, what are you talking about? We can just,
the last portion we cut in a couple seconds.
Yeah, I'm a freaking artist. I can't just come up with this shit off the top of my head. Are you freaking kidding me right now?
Good point. Exactly right. Oh,
God. Hey, this is Michael Wright.
And I'm Shannon Wright.
Join us for The Right Way with Shannon and Mike, Monday through Thursday from 7 to 9 a.m. right here on SHR Media.
Why are they joining us?
For fun things like sports, politics.
Oh, maybe some news and entertainment?
And all kinds of other things.
Money and recipes and events, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, so join us Monday through Thursday, 7 to 9 a.m. here on shrmedia.com.
When dirty politicians, shadow governments, and deceptive Islam blind the world with fake stream media smoke, their only fear is one man with a cane. I'm Dave Milner. Join me through shrmedia.com, highplanestalkradio.com, and the Western Free Radio Network at Spreaker, YouTube, and iTunes for a different perspective weekly on the Unpleasant Blind Guy. And catch me on Jeff Mitchell's EDL Radio on blogtalkradio.com. There's
no surrender ever,
because truth is not always pleasant.
This is Sam on SHR Media. You can listen to my new show starting on Tuesdays in January. Get my perspective on national politics, a conservative's perspective on California politics, the latest in the war on terror, all of that and a lot more here on Tuesdays at SHR Media. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Sam_SHR Media.
Beware, the Jersey Takeover is here. Every Monday through Friday, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, you can catch River Common Sense Show hosted by Jersey Joe, right here on shrmedia.com. Only Jersey can deliver hell like no one else. So consider this your fair warning.
Hey, this is Sackhead Clint, and with Sackhead Sean, Sackhead BZ. No communists allowed on the SHR Media Network.
Damn straight, mister.
Back to the show.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, you're listening to the Bloviating Zeppelin's Berserk Bobcat Saloon radio show. It's the second hour of our 2-hour event tonight. We're speaking to attorney Lawrence Kogan, who represents property owners and recognizes that property rights are quickly diminishing in the United States of America in terms of what he calls the Europeanization of the United States of America. Before we broke, Mr. Kogan had mentioned Agenda 21 and how some of the things that he's been speaking about may dovetail in with Agenda 21 itself. And as I indicated, a lot of people probably are not aware of what Agenda 21 might be. Can you tell us about Agenda 21, its purposes?
Well, Agenda 21 is a local version of the grandiose UN International Sustainable Development Doctrine, which is basically the world is overpopulated. Everybody has to pare back what they consume and spend, and they have to look at the environment in a way which is collective as opposed to something that you appropriate. And as a result, basically the Europeans have created a whole new paradigm of society which basically disparages capitalism, disparages individual rights, disparages the United States Constitution for recognizing individual rights, and hope to replace it with some type of collective Borg-like global governance. That's what UN Sustainable Development is. It's sacrificing for the present so that you can allow for the future, in a nutshell.
Right, because as
Malthusian.
we're Malthusian. Good point. As we're well aware, because Paul Ehrlich wrote about this in the 60s in the population bomb, and we all know how accurate Dr. Paul Ehrlich was, don't we?
He's just like every other doomsayer. Okay.
Okay, now we know that. You mentioned some water rights, and I know you want to get into a couple of cases because you sent me a couple of articles out of the American Agriculturist. agriculturist. And we'll get to those. One of the things that you mentioned, though, was the Sacramento Delta, because that's right around the corner from where I am right now. And in my opinion, we had a massive abrogation of common sense when, in its infinite wisdom, the state of California decided that it was going to waste millions, it ended up being trillions of gallons of water to protect a fish, the Delta smelt, which at last count, depending on whom you believed at the time when they made the count, this was 2015, the count of the Delta smelt ranged from 1 to 5. And so that was during the time, folks, of the California drought, which was already massively devastating to the state of California's environment, to its economy, to its residents, its farmers. If I'm not mistaken, it cost about $2.7 billion. People estimate about 10,000 agricultural jobs. About listen to this, about 600,000 acres of farmland in California, some of the finest farmland on the planet, went fallow because of the drought, because all these free and clear-thinking people in the state of California, in Sacramento, the locus of evil for everything on the West Coast, decided in their infinite wisdom that, hey, 5 fishies take precedence over you and me and everything else. Do you remember when that occurred, Mr. Kogan?
I think that was 20 years ago.
No,
or at least in the beginning of the beginning of the 21st century.
It occurred in 2015.
Okay, because I do know that there were a series of Delta smelt cases going back 15 to 20 or 25 years ago, and it was constant, ongoing litigation. But I could attribute it to 2 things. One, the sustainability freaks.
Yes.
Have created a UN office in San Francisco. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, and so therefore, what we're talking about now is not agriculture, but sustainable agriculture, which really means you bank your water, you put up fences along streams and other water courses so that your cattle don't roam into the water and pollute it. You follow all types of sustainable agricultural practices that the bureaucrats tell you to practice, and you just don't farm every day anymore. That's sustainable development. Now, you're talking about the state of California. I think we spoke before when I was in Las Vegas about really the correct way to refer to California. I don't know if it's as much a state as it is an American state as it is probably the 28th European Union member state.
I'll wager
California,
they'd like to be that, I would suppose.
California legislature cites European statutes when it makes its laws. If you go in there, you'll find citations to European statutes.
Perfect. Why not? Hey, we had former retired Judge Stevens recently, either today or yesterday, say outright, the 97-year-old bastard, say, hey, we need to rescind those Second Amendment rights. So, hey, perfect. Works for Europe. We can see how well it's working there. I'm sure it'll work so well.
He's also the judge, Mark. If you remember back in 2008, he was the Supreme Court justice that led the opinion that said that carbon dioxide is an air pollutant under the Clean Air Act.
Right. It's only one of the nutrients required for life on the planet, so it's not really of much consequence.
So, yeah, he's 97 years old. You know his marbles have rolled away, but he's still out there quacking up a storm. You got to give him credit. You have to give him survival instinct credit.
Okay. I still think Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I think she's on, at the end of the day, she goes into a very dark room, and she gets an entire blood infusion flush so that she can keep on living and contain and continue to enable the processes of leftists. You sent me...
It's interesting, Mark, because she was actually very close to Justice Scalia.
Yes, she was. You're right.
They were close because they were polar opposites, and they depended on one another in order to keep the other in check with regard to the legitimacy of their arguments, knowing that they were on opposite sides of the spectrum.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think they were friends as well, were they not?
Yes, they were. So, there is something to be said for polarity. Okay? You need a loyal opposition in order to keep yourself honest.
Yes, okay.
That's what they do in the British Parliament, correct?
Yes, it is. You sent me a couple of articles, and I'd like to get into those because we've got about 45 minutes remaining or so. Here's one that you sent me. This is March 6th of this year. This is from the American Agriculturalist. And it says the title is "The Swamp is Alive and Being Challenged. Northeast Thinking, Farmers' Legal Challenge Over Wetlands Confirms a Darker Politicized Swamp." And the article starts out, ever tried wading through a wetland or swamp? As a kid, I swam in deep drainage ditches and survived blood-sucking leeches to tell the tale. Things lurking in those waters can wrap around your legs, trip you up. If you're barefooted, mushy bottoms ooze around your toes and ankles, sucking you in deeper. You might even feel slippery critters gliding by or nipping you. That's the natural world swamp. Much easier to wade through than today's deeper, darker swamp of Washington, D.C. The politicized drain the swamp cliche rightly originated in the National Mall, a wetland tiled out in 1791, but replaced by a humanized swamp, self-important with authority, money, and power. Evidence of this surfaced during the ongoing legal battle of the United States of America versus Robert Brace and Robert Brace Farms. In brief, Pennsylvania's Robert Brace and other swamp-busted farmers from Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota were caught in the Clean Water Act's swamp buster provision of the 1980s. Despite securing prior commenced conversion approvals from local USDA agencies, they lost use of once farmed land due to shifting wetland criteria encouraged by outside special interests. The same shifting swamp buster provision resulted in extending the wetlands designation to another 30 acres. That's private property. 30 acres of Brace Farms land in Erie County, Pennsylvania. The alleged taking is at the core of Brace's argument raised in the U.S. District Court of Western Pennsylvania last fall. And this subtitle right now, what was Uncle Sam hiding? In October, Jeffrey Wood, U.S. Acting Attorney General, sought protective orders to prevent Lawrence Kogan, Brace's attorney, from accessing government records and subpoenaing new testimony. He reasoned that the discovery requests were aimed at challenging the settled facts, legal rulings, and judicial orders. Now, U.S. Magistrate Judge Susan Baxter didn't buy it, ruling the discoveries could continue. So, Mr. Kogan, perhaps you could give us a little bit about this case and Mr. Robert Brace and his farm.
Well, this is a third-generation family farmer that's always lived in Erie County, Waterford Township, PA. And the lands in question are approximately 137 acres. It's several tracts integrated hydrologically with one another. The water flows through them all. The ditches that are used to drain the lands, given their wetter status than out in the west, were dug, excavated by his grandfather, by his father, by him. All of that changed. They farmed the land. Part of the land was used for crops that grew very well in a wetter environment. And they also pastured land, and they grew hay on the land. All of that seemed to change, or began to change, really, in 1977 when the Clean Water Act amendments of 1977 came online. which viewed the preservation of wetlands as priority number one, because wetlands had been drained from this country since its formation. Wetlands were depleting significantly at a very fast rate, and the environmentalists were up in arms saying we need to stop this, and guess what? Agriculture is the bogeyman. Not just land developers, but agriculture.
Yes,
this was before the Sustainable Development Movement, which began officially in '92.
Who needs food anyway?
Well, actually in '87. This was about the same time as the Gro Harlem Brundtland, the Prime Minister of Norway, came in with her grandiose notion of collective sustainable development. I met that woman once. She was as wide as she was tall.
Okay.
But and I don't mean to say anything about heavy people, but she was just so full of herself. I met her at the New York City Bar Association back in 2003, I remember. And she was just so full of herself, so self-assured, that I couldn't help but try to get some digs in. But the point is, Mr. Brace has been subject to agency enforcement actions and court litigation since 1990. Actually, starting in 1987. His sons, who were in their 50s, were in their late teens, early 20s when this started, and that's all they could remember throughout their entire life, that they're in this long battle. These poor people have to spend money to protect their constitutionally sanctioned private property rights. And they're assumed to be guilty under the Clean Water Act and the wetlands rules especially, because they're strict liability rules. Now what that means is that the government doesn't have to show that you harmed the environment physically. All they have to show is that they have a rule and you broke it. That's it. They could charge $25,000 a day penalties, which is what they keep on imposing. You may remember a small young Wyoming farmer with a stock pond a couple of years ago. He diverted water from a stream, created a little stock pond. The government descended on him like a SWAT team going after criminals. He had to get nonprofit legal help in order to get out from under that weight. Mr. Brace has been facing a similar weight for 30 years. When he started, he was in his mid-40s. Now he's close to 80.
How can you survive?
And unfortunately,
how could he survive?
Well,
how can
really
a family
strong.
like that survive against the powers arrayed against him like that?
He is rock solid. He's of Ukrainian ancestry. Okay? And he's old school. And
what a guy.
He did follow the law back then. The law was in a constant state of change. There were conflicting statutes, and the government chose which statute they wanted to follow and ignored the other one. They gave him this is interesting, and when we went through all these different depositions, we found that the EPA, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and the Fish and Wildlife Service all ignored the United States Department of Agriculture. It's almost like the poor stepchild. They don't want to acknowledge. And it's the USDA, under the Food Security Act of 1985, that allowed Mr. Brace to convert his wetter land into productive cropland, if he had met the requirements of the statute. Now, I'm generalizing, but he had to start his conversion of the land by December 23rd, 85. That would have allowed him to continue to receive what they called cost sharing with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, where they would allow you, the government would pay you to make your land agriculturally productive. Most people don't even know about this statute and its conversion mechanism, and EPA and the court took advantage of that back then and said, well, we don't have to follow the statute. The Clean Water Act applies. We're talking here about a landowner that devastated wetlands. They didn't frame the case as a farmer who was told that he had wetlands on his farm that he couldn't use. So agriculture wasn't really important to the government. It's the fact that he broke the rules in the Clean Water Act. Now, if you could tell me, Mark, how if you have the release of sediment into a sediment-bottomed water course, you have pollution. I could tell you that carbon dioxide is an air pollutant also. It's the same type of logic.
I don't know, it seems awfully natural to me, but then what the hell do I know? I'm not the federal government. Again, this reeks of theft. This reeks of stealing. This reeks of removing rights and freedoms from individuals. It stinks.
Yeah, but when he gets, and it's what's worse is he followed the law, he got his status of converted. It allowed him to get money from the USDA, and then several years later, the Army Corps and EPA issued regulations that said, well, we're going to treat, converted lands as if they don't constitute wetlands anymore, and therefore they're not waters of the U.S., and therefore this Clean Water Act doesn't apply. EPA and the Corps ignores the regulation. So he followed the rules, followed counsel's advice at that time, followed government officials' advice to get this special designation, and yet the other agencies ignore it entirely. Okay, so eventually the case went to court at the district court level. He won. The court believed that what he was doing was normal farming practice. And then the government appealed. They went to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, which is kind of a lighter version of the Ninth Circuit. Okay? And they overturned the district court and said, well, the district court's wrong. You violated the Clean Water Act. We don't care about your conversion. You're liable for the penalties. Mr. Brace tried to appeal it to a full court and then to the U.S. Supreme Court and was denied the opportunity and eventually was forced in 96 to enter into a consent decree with the government, which, as you know, was a very equally bargained agreement, with the government holding all the cards and him just saying, yes, sir. Well, so they created this 30-acre consent decree area. And they said, you can't touch this area unless you get a permit. And it's within the discretion of the Army Corps to grant that permit, and EPA to grant it, to approve of their grant. So what they did was, for years and years, they had this consent decree. They had to restore the land to what it was before he converted it. But their restoration plan wasn't working the way it was supposed to work, because it didn't just affect the area that was subject to the consent decree. It affected the other farm tracts adjacent to that area, because all three of the tracts were hydrologically integrated. The water flowed through all three, so if you block the water by cutting drainage tile in the consent decree area, it affected the flow of water, the hydraulics of the water. So the water would flood at the surface and under the surface when it was helped along by a series of beaver dams that appeared all over the property regularly, and culverts and ditches that ended up remaining clogged because Mr. Brace was afraid of maintaining them for fear that he would create a point source pollutant called dirt that would flow into the consent decree.
Well, again,
so for years he tried to get them. I'm sorry, Mark.
It would appear that the federal government, A, is changing the goalposts all along the way, and B, is doing what now the federal government is famous for doing, and that's deciding, well, we'll just obey what laws we want to obey when we want to obey them, and we're the big dog in the room, so we get to make those decisions.
Right. So that consent decree didn't work, but the restoration plan didn't work because, why? The developers of it never considered the way the water flowed through the land. They never did a a hydraulic or hydrologic study to figure out whether they were only going to impact that 30-acre area out of 137. That wasn't important. They didn't consider the beaver dams and their effect on what they call backflow. When you have an obstruction caused by a dam, a beaver dam, and the water that flows into the area has nowhere to go, guess what it's going to do? It's going to start to rise and potentially flow in the other direction. They didn't consider what would happen if the culverts near the consent decree area or the ditches near the consent decree area were not maintained because of fear of point source pollutants. All these things they never figured. They stayed in their bubble, and they said, well, ideally, this is the way it should work. So when Mr. Brace called them back in, they delayed, and then they finally came back in, and they walked the property with he and his sons, and the agents came to the conclusion that he's got real agricultural ditches here, that he should be allowed the exemption for ditch maintenance. We'll let him clean the ditches and farm the land. The problem is that encouraged the Braces to clean the ditches and prepare them for farming. The government then comes back and says, well, we never authorized you to do that. You just violated the act again. And unless you restore everything, we're going to bring another lawsuit to enforce that consent decree which you violated.
And how do you win? How does he win? He can't
Well,
win.
right now, he had 2 lawsuits that were filed 9 days before President Trump was inaugurated. You think that was political?
Oh, gosh, no.
One lawsuit was to enforce the consent decree on that old parcel that was in dispute 30 years ago. The second lawsuit is a new one that deals with an adjacent parcel of 20 acres, which is part of the 157-acre total, because the 137-acre total grew to 157. And they're saying that most of 19 of those acres, 18 or 19 of those acres are all wetland, and he basically dredged and filled in that wetland area, which is U.S. waters. So he's got 2 lawsuits he's got to deal with. Both of them arose out of the same authorization the federal agents gave to the family to do what they then said they did authorize them to do.
Folks, we're talking to Lawrence Kogan, an attorney, watching our property rights, our private property rights, fly away into the ozone. We're coming up on the last segment. When we come back, I want to run a situation by Mr. Kogan, one that I personally experienced, which opened my eyes to how the federal government really works with regard to its precious resources and, let's see, little things called fairy shrimp. Folks, we're going to be right back. You're listening to the Bloviating Zeppelin's Berserk Bobcat Saloon radio show right here live and direct on the SHR Media Network. Don't go away.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Hey, it's Sean from the Sackheads radio show. Also one of the owners here at the SHR Media Network. Are you opinionated? Have you ever wanted to do your own show? Have you ever heard somebody like the Sackheads and go, yeah, I could probably do that better? Well, now's your chance. Send me a 5-minute clip at sackheadsradio@gmail.com, and maybe you can be part of the SHR broadcasting team. sackheadsradio@gmail.com.
It's your business diva here, Melanie Collette. I am inviting you to a front row seat as I discuss some of the most intriguing details of wealth and finance with today's movers and shakers in the world of business. Listen in and discover financial truths on a global, domestic, and household scale. Uncover topics that will impact your wallet today and in the future. Money Talk with Melanie airs Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. East, 2 p.m. West, right here on SHR Media and High Plains Pundit Talk Radio. You can't afford to miss it.
Beware, the Jersey Takeover is here. Every Monday through Friday, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, you can catch River Common Sense Show hosted by Jersey Joe, right here on shrmedia.com. Only Jersey can deliver hell like no one else. So consider this your fair warning.
Hey guys, this is Sean from the Sackheads Radio Show. Check us out every Wednesday, 8 p.m. Pacific on the SHR Media Network.
And this is Sackhead Clint, as the best-looking one of the bunch. It's my duty to remind you to check us out on our YouTube channel.
And don't forget to check us out on the SHR Media Facebook page. The best-looking one? Really? You going to go there?
Well,
every Wednesday, 8 p.m. Pacific, right here on the
SHR Voters' Choice.
Media
I have the award
Network.
right here.
Human by race, Christian by faith, American by nationality, and conservative by choice. Reverend Ralph J. Chittum Sr. is the right guy on SHR Media from 8:05 to 9 p.m. Monday through Friday. And if on the rare occasion I am ever wrong, I will still always be right. The right guy on SHR Media.
This is Sam on SHR Media. You can listen to my new show starting on Tuesdays in January. Get my perspective on national politics, a conservative's perspective on California politics, the latest in the war on terror, all of that and a lot more here on Tuesdays at SHR Media. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Sam_SHR Media.
When dirty politicians, shadow governments, and deceptive Islam blind the world with fake stream media smoke, their only fear is one man with a cane. I'm Dave Milner. Join me through shrmedia.com, highplains.talkradio.com, and the Western Free Radio Network at Spreaker, YouTube, and iTunes for a different perspective weekly on the Unpleasant Blind Guy. And catch me on Jeff Mitchell's EDL Radio on blogtalkradio.com. There's
no surrender ever,
because truth is not always pleasant.
Hey, this is Michael Wright.
And I'm Shannon Wright.
Join us for The Right Way with Shannon and Mike, Monday through Thursday from 7 to 9 a.m. right here on SHR Media.
Why are they joining us?
For fun things like sports, politics.
Oh, maybe some news and entertainment?
And all kinds of other things.
Money and recipes and events, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, so join us Monday through Thursday, 7 to 9 a.m. here on shrmedia.com.
Broadcasting behind enemy lines in occupied California, a mere 2 miles from the state capital, the bloviating Zeppelin's Berserk Bobcat Saloon radio show can be heard every Tuesday and Thursday night at 8 p.m. Pacific and 11 p.m. Eastern, only on the SHR Media Network. Go to shrmedia.com to listen. You can also watch on the SHR Media Facebook page and the SHR Media YouTube channel. No goldfish were abused in the making of this ad.
Hey, it's Sean from the Sackheads Radio Show.
Hey, it's Sean from the Sackheads Radio Show.
And Sackheads BZ.
Wait, I'm Sean.
No, I'm Sean.
All right, listen, we'll figure this out every Wednesday night, 8 p.m. Pacific, right here on the...
Where the hell is Clint?
On the SHR Media Network, www.shrmedia.com. Check us out on Facebook and YouTube. Now, right back to this amazing show right here on the SHR Media Network.
You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, it is the final segment of the bloviating Zeppelin's Berserk Bobcat Saloon radio show, live and direct from the SHR Media studio, 2 miles from the veritable belly of the beast, the locus of evil on the entire left coast, broadcasting behind enemy lines in occupied California. We've been talking to Lawrence Kogan. It's the final segment, the final half hour. And he's essentially gone point after point after point after point, indicating how you lovely American critters, are losing your property rights and your rights and freedoms in general to our stellar U.S. government, which lives, as Mr. Kogan indicates, in a bubble where there are no consequences for much of anything, and unintended consequences, well, they can go straight to hell. I'm going to read from an article a little bit later, but first, Mr. Kogan, I wanted to tell you how I found out about how the federal government works a few years ago. It's no secret that I was in law enforcement for 41 years, and in the process of doing that, I enjoyed training. There was an area that we in the department wanted to use for an EVOC course. That's an emergency vehicle operations course where vehicles would drive over asphalted area, and we would train emergency responders how to drive in Code 3 situations, in pursuit, parking situations, vehicle control situations, etc. And we were invited out to McClellan Air Force Base to do it, which was a decommissioned Air Force base, which closed in the early 1990s. And in the process of attempting to figure out whether we could relocate our former training area to that new site under federal control, we were told that the fairy shrimp were an impediment to our going there because apparently when it rains, fairy shrimp come into these little, what they called vernal pools. And the vernal pools, and we couldn't go out there because we were going to be bad people for killing fairy shrimp and vernal pools. Oh, wait, with one exception. I then discovered two words, set-asides. The government said, you know what, if you come up with some set-asides, meaning cash, meaning property, if you come up with some set-asides, we'll let you have this area, indicating to me clearly, well, the federal government really couldn't give a shit less about vernal pools or fairy shrimp. It really was about the money and the power and the control. So, Lawrence Kogan, I don't know, how many times per week or day does this happen all across the fruited plain?
What you're really talking about is what they call wetlands mitigation.
Yes, mitigation,
Okay, where you basically volunteer up to take your private property and put it pretty much into a fishbowl that you really can't use for anything other than observation. Okay, you dedicate the land to preservation uses. And then they will let you out from jail to exercise your rights on the other parcel.
Yes, let you out from jail. I like
that. The interesting thing is that they used to make you buy the other property to substitute. Okay? And this is another case that I'm dealing with where, because my clients are so poor, they're out of eastern Pennsylvania, in the town of Morrisville, where Mr. Morris was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, okay? In their case, they're so poor, so what the government did was, the Army Corps did was they found another party, a very big, deep pocket, to do the mitigation on their property for them, so that that other company can gain the credits for having polluted another area. And that company's Waste Management.
Oh, goody, Waste Management, great.
So so in that case, which is also 30 years, it's actually a little older than the Brace case. That case involved a Hungarian freedom fighter who was captured by the Soviets when the Soviets rolled their tanks over Hungary back in the 50s. And they basically trained him as a tank mechanic and a vehicle mechanic. Doing his work, he somehow came into contact with the Americans during the Cold War and found his way back here by advising the CIA on the movements of the Soviet vehicles. So he comes into the United States, having done something to benefit America, a hero, and he buys property in Morrisville, Pennsylvania. He was a garage mechanic, so he started a garage, had a two-family home, half of which he rented out, and he saved up a nest egg, and he found a piece of property catty corner to his home in his garage, of 15 acres or 14 and a half acres that he wanted now to build a larger garage on, expand his business. The American dream. The land that he spotted was actually being used at that time, I think for 30 years, as an unofficial dumping site by the borough and the township adjacent to it. It was filled with thousands and thousands of tires and concrete and other other refuse. Not really disgusting refuse, but like concrete and steel and some other things. So what he did was he bought that property and then dug up all the tires and all the bad stuff and pulled it out. And he filled it with sand. He wanted to build on it. Guess what? Army Corps of Engineers and EPA descend upon his property and say, your property is mostly wetland. You just violated the Clean Water Act. Now, this guy fought, he served in the Soviet regime. He escaped the Cold War. This is not a soft guy. He's a tough guy. I mean, the farmer in Erie, he's tough, but this guy, I think, was a little tougher. He told the government, nuts to you. This is America. I have constitutional rights. And guess what they did back in return? They put him in jail. They put him in jail. He served the longest criminal sentence for a violation of the Clean Water Act at that time. I think he had 3 years of incarceration, 2 years of staying in a halfway house, and then another 3 to 5 years of being on probation.
I'd like to hear the conversation in prison that would have occurred between he and other people. The other guy next to him said, what did you come in for? Well, I shivved my mother. What did you come in for? I cleared stuff off my property.
I took waste, garbage, and took it off the land. That was put on by the neighbor, okay, who's a tire guy. He just dumped the tires in the lot. The thing is, when he was in jail, the government came up with the fantastic story that they authorized more fill being put into the land. He had the ability somehow through a jail cell, to direct them to put more things in the land in violation of the case. He had a criminal action brought against him. He had a civil action, and the court was being presided over by a famous judge who happened to be already on the brink of senility back then.
Wonderful.
He's the guy that oversaw the Abscam case of corruption back in New York, in Philadelphia rather, back in the 80s. And this guy, whatever the government said, it was true. And unfortunately, my client back then had a really bad series of lawyers that didn't understand any of this law, because environmental wetlands law at that time in the 80s was a new, evolving field. So the government had all the cards. They made the rules, and they knew how to apply them, and everyone else had to figure it out after the fact. Bring this forward 30 years, these same people, basically they said that of the 14.5 acres, 10.5 acres are wetlands, and the rest of it is upland. That's all you can work on is 4 acres. And they wouldn't even tell them where the lines are or where the wetlands were. So they didn't know where to go.
Oh, okay.
Basically, this is a case where they create the government. You guess.
You just go ahead and guess, and then if you're wrong, we'll screw you. If you happen to be right, well, we'll still look at you with terrible grimaces and frowns. But screw you if you get it wrong. We'll throw you back in prison.
Right. Now, he came out of prison, and he was very ill. He was in his 50s when he went in, and he came out ill. He had cancer. He had dementia. He had Parkinson's. And after he came out, they still said he did more things to pollute the land in violation of the court's order.
Right.
Okay, the lawyers didn't really argue very well. So the government kept on saying, well, you did things that were against the law, and we're now going to seek sanctions. Now, one of the interesting things that happened when he was in prison, the government did what they called the remediation that the court ordered.
Okay.
But the government didn't just follow the court order. The government went 3 times the amount of remediation that the court ordered. They left the stuff sitting there, okay, and then later accused them of using the same stuff to fill in the land when it was actually the government that compressed it into the ground. This is a fantastic story also. It's basically fraud. by the government upon the court. So when they wanted Waste Management to do the most recent remediation last summer, I said, nuts to you guys. My client has a right to figure out where the wetland area is, and they're going to bring in their scientific experts. And Waste Management, you're just going to have to sit there and wait. So guess what? They get visits at their home, sometimes by Vinnie Gumbats type characters. Remember Rodney Dangerfield's character, Vinnie Gumbats?
Oh, yes.
Okay, anytime he wanted to frighten somebody, he said he'd get his friend Vinnie Gumbats to come and visit with him. He'd make them an offer they couldn't refuse. Well, this is the kind of stuff that's going on here in eastern Pennsylvania.
Well, it's like the property Gestapo. I can think of no other reason. It's like the property KGB. Do you have your papers?
And this case is famous also. It's the United States versus Pozgai, Pozsgai. These poor people are still dealing with this. The only difference now is that I'm their counsel, and I'm not going to let the government ramrod them, which is creating all types of dynamic with the government, I have to say. But you're correct. Everywhere you turn these days, you have the administrative state. If I can, Mark, I would like to cite people to a dissent in a U.S. Supreme Court case from 2013. And this dissent was written by Justice John Roberts, Chief Justice John Roberts, joined by Justices Kennedy and Alito. It's the case name is City of Arlington versus the Federal Communications Commission.
Ah, okay.
And it's 133 Supreme Court Reporter, 1863, in the year 2013. They said in their dissenting opinion, as a practical matter, administrative agencies today exercise legislative power, executive power, and judicial power. And they were warning about how the accumulation of these powers in the same hand is not an occasional or isolated exception to the constitutional plan, but rather a central feature of modern American government. The administrative state wields vast power and touches almost every aspect of daily life. The framers could hardly have envisioned today's vast and varied bureaucracy and the authority administrative agencies now hold over our economic, social, and political activities. The administrative state, with its reams of regulations, would leave them rubbing their eyes. And the federal bureaucracy continues to grow. Those are the words of Chief Justice John Roberts, joined by Justice Kennedy and Alito of the United States Supreme Court. That is a stark warning.
It should be. It ought to be.
Okay. We have a runaway government. We have a swamp that is facilitating that. What are we going to do?
There's a couple of paragraphs in an article that you sent me about you that I'd like to read to everybody so that they understand a little bit more about where it is that you're coming from. It starts off with this sub-area of lies and broken promises. In the 17-page law review, Kogan documents how a choreographed and coordinated campaign by federal agencies and environmental groups reversed USDA-authorized commenced conversions of wetlands to farmlands. Then, the farms, primarily in Pennsylvania and the Dakotas, were precluded from cost-sharing benefits they were entitled to under the Food Security Acts of 1985. The actions, he contends, amounted to regulatory takings of farmers' private property for a public preservation restoration of wetlands as waters of the U.S. without just compensation. This was a violation of the Constitution's Fifth Amendment, he adds. Why now? Kogan hopes the law review article will inspire current fair-minded federal agency and congressional leaders to craft necessary statutory and regulatory changes in the Clean Water Act, changes that return these farmers to their prior status. The Trump administration hails how it's relieved American farmers of prior regulatory burdens and ended the regulatory assault on their way of life, Kogan says. Nevertheless, Merely delaying implementation of the WOTUS rule by 2 years, not rescinding it, doesn't go nearly far enough to guarantee this relief, he argued. WOTUS extends EPA and the Corps' already expansive CWA Section 404 wetlands jurisdiction over private farmlands. Kogan believes President Donald Trump's more informed advisors recognize they're facing a deeply entrenched regulatory and law enforcement bureaucracy linked to the deep state. Meanwhile, Brace's lawsuit, we talked about him earlier, the first hour, Brace's lawsuit remains in the U.S. District Court of Western Pennsylvania. And it's a perfect summary. That's how things go. We've got about four or five more minutes left. In that amount of time, what would you like folks to know about you and the work that you're doing?
Well, what I'm doing is not unique, really, I don't think. I think anybody with a conscience and an ability and an interest can do just the same thing. Maybe not, if they're not a lawyer, they can't do legal work, but they can do other work. We all, as Americans, have a responsibility to our families and really to our neighbors if we want this republic to stand. That's what I'm trying to promote, both through the policy work that I continue and through the legal work. If we allow the government to separate us and divide and conquer us, we lose. If we work together as individuals, not as a collective like the Europeans, but as individuals with a common interest, we can place government back in the position that it was once in, working for us, not we working for them.
It appears we're losing our freedoms, and it appears we're losing our freedoms at a prodigious rate. Not only that, Lawrence Kogan, it appears that the current new generations are more than willing to acquiesce the rights and the freedoms that previous generations paid for in blood and lives. Do you see, sir, that there's a way that somehow we can stem this terrible bleeding, that we can bring common sense laws back to the United States, bring any amount of common sense back to the federal government, or is the beast just too damn big and the leash is slipping off, and in the not too terribly distant future that leash may fall off entirely?
I mean, that's always a possibility if people continue to place their heads in the sand. I mean, let's look at gun control, right?
Perfect.
Okay, gun control. The left is going out there trying to say that all guns should be controlled, guns should not be freely allowed to be purchased, there should be all types of psychological testing, which to some extent may be true, just like with cars. You don't want to let crazies drive cars because they kill people. But with guns, why don't they pass a law that where a young person, let's say under the age of 25, that still lives at home, carries in a gun and starts shooting up a place, the parents are going to be held legally responsible for that action. I don't think you're going to see a lot more young people living at home with guns being unaccounted for, and that parents won't start looking into what they're doing.
Oh, my God. Leftists would go apoplectic over that. They'd go 210 over 190. Their carotids would explode.
It's a common sense idea. I mean, you hold the parents responsible for their children. They don't seem to want to be responsible for their children, and they let them run. They let them run free, and they get themselves involved in trouble. But that's rights and responsibilities. Everyone's got the right to live their own lives, but not to tread on others' rights. That's the libertarian ethic, is it not, Mark?
It is indeed. And I don't know if
live and let live.
I don't know if you're going to be there, but I'm going to be there again with SHR Media at the Freedom Fest again in Las Vegas. I think they're going back to the same motel. What do you think now, in your estimation? We got about another 2 minutes to go. In your estimation, Lawrence Kogan, what do you think are the things that citizens, American citizens in the United States, what should we be most concerned about now?
Government listening in not only to your broadcast but to our telephone calls, and actually being able to access your computer through software updates.
Yes.
Okay. Could you imagine working on your computer, Apple update as you're working, and it reports back all the files of the software program that you're working on that you have, and it transmitted back to Mother? And then if the government calls upon the company, they have to release the information, and the pretense given, this is for national security.
That's pretty much happening on a daily basis. We already know. Lawrence Kogan, we already know John Brennan lied. We know he lied.
That's right.
We know that James Clapper lied to Congress baldly, nakedly, and said, no, we don't collect the information. In the basements where our liquid-cooled Cray computers happen to be sitting, in the server farms, we listen to everything at all. Before we go.
Right, but I think there's a new law that actually Congress just passed this week called the Shadow Act, I believe.
Okay, what was that? I'm not familiar with that.
Well, I'm not exactly sure the name of the statute. Somebody had informed me of this, where they actually, with the software uploads, is the newest form of their monitoring. That's what I'm trying to refer to, and I can get back to you on that information.
Okay.
I think people should start looking into that. That's all.
Well, look, if it's digital in any form, it can be hacked, no matter what you say. Period. End of statement. Before we go, folks, we've been talking to Lawrence Kogan, an attorney who's been working for the people of the United States of America, trying, whenever possible, to preserve property rights and the rights and freedoms of regular Americans like you and me, because it's a common sense approach. So, please, Lawrence Kogan, can you tell us where you can be read, where you can be found on the internet, your websites, your companies, your social media locations? If there was ever a time for a promo, this is it. Go, sir.
Well, I'm a little on the old school side, so all I have are websites and phone numbers at which people can reach me.
Okay, any of those would be grand.
Yes, the first one is what you shared with your audience when we started, the Institute for Trade Standards and Sustainable Development web address, which is www.itsd.org.
Okay.
The other website is the Kogan Law Group website, and that's Kogan with a K, at www.koganlawgroup.com. There's many, many, many documents on each of those websites that have hyperlinks if you are curious and like to read and or have insomnia.
Well, I can tell you there's a guy in chat right now who, when you said that, he's going to be going over there right now, quick like a bunny, to go read this because he's an attorney out of Florida. And he loves to listen to shows like this, and he loves to listen to people like you. So, folks, I'm sorry, go ahead, sir.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
We've been listening to Lawrence Kogan. He gave you the ways and the means in which to contact him. So, sir, I want to thank you ever so kindly for being here in the saloon tonight. I appreciate that it was a remarkable sacrifice that you made, because right now on the left coast it's about 10 o'clock, and on your coast, the East Coast, it's 1 damn a.m. It's the next day. So trust me when I tell you, sir, I greatly appreciate the time that you have given us, the full 2 hours tonight. And it's time to go. Appreciate it. Mr. Kogan, thank you ever so kindly for being here tonight, and I greatly appreciate your time and your input and, of course, the great work that you do here for the people of the United States. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mark. I'm glad to be back. Thank you.
Take care, sir. Thank you, and good night.
Have a good evening.
Thank you. Folks, That's it. We're going to be talking on the Sackheads radio show tomorrow night. Sackheads Clint is not going to be here. I may as well tell you that up front. Absent exigent circumstances, Sackheads Clint will not be here. But it will be myself and Sackheads Sean.
Monsieur has
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, thanks for listening to the Bloviating Zeppelin's Berserk Bobcat Saloon radio show live and direct on the SHR Media Network. As I was broadcasting behind enemy lines in occupied California, if you want to contact me, you can find me on Twitter at BZEP, BZEP, on my blog at bloviatingzeppelin.net, or you can send me a nasty gram with as many F and S words as you want, bz at shrmedia.com. Why should you be any different? My original music is by Possessed Tranquility. You can find them at reverbnation.com. Promotional consideration by the Boeing Company. If it ain't Boeing, I ain't going. And by Pratt & Whitney Engines. Thrust. You can trust. And of course, thanks to my personal KC-135 Kettle 1 refueling team with whom I will be consorting. Guaranteed bank on it. Take it to the bank in less than an hour. Thank you ever so kindly for listening. Thanks to Mr. Lawrence Kogan for being here tonight. Thank you for being involved in the chat room, for listening in the podcast. God bless. Take care. Be safe. Good night.
Everybody quiet down now and get some sleep.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, Mama. Good night, Ben.
Good night, everyone. Good night, Mama. Good night, Daddy.
Good night, children. Good night, Daddy. Good night, Elizabeth.
Good night, John Boy. Good night, Jim Bob. Good night, Jim Bob.
Good night, Jim Bob.
What's going on? I was asleep. What's everybody doing?
Good night,
Good night, Jim Bob.
Good night, and good luck.